Mirror at Emberwick Hall by Clara Voss. Chapter 1, The Arrival. Emberwick Hall stood at the edge of the village, its tall spires piercing the gray skies, a shadow against the fading light of late autumn. It had been empty for years, or so the townsfolk believed. The ivy-clad stone walls whispered of history, dark and ancient. Yet its doors had remained closed, its windows clouded with the dust of disuse. Now, with the arrival of a stranger, the manor seemed to stir once again, as though it had been waiting all this time. Anna Westbrook, the newcomer to Emberwick, felt the weight of the place the moment she saw it. It was a house far too large for one person, with a past far too tangled for any reasonable explanation. The villagers had told her little about it, save for their warnings. Don't go near Emberwick Hall. Some things are better left forgotten. But Anna was not one to heed idle gossip. She had come to Emberwick seeking solitude after the untimely death of her husband. An artist by trade, she hoped the quiet of the village would allow her mind to clear, to escape the lingering shadows of grief. She rented a small cottage near the town square, but it was Emberwick Hall that drew her attention, even when she tried to ignore it. The manor seemed to call to her in a way she could not explain. Every time she walked past it, her gaze was inexplicably drawn to the dusty windows, as though there was something behind them, watching her. The idea of exploring the house had crossed her mind on more than one occasion, but fear always stopped her, until today. The day Anna walked up the long, overgrown path toward Emberwick Hall, it seemed that the wind itself had calmed, as though holding its breath. The thick mist that hung over the village had begun to creep down from the hills, thickening in the garden that surrounded the house. Her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the silence as she approached the front door, which, to her surprise, was ajar. She hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was cold, almost icy, and smelled faintly of mildew and decay. The foyer stretched before her, vast and dimly lit, its walls lined with old portraits whose eyes followed her every movement. A grand staircase spiraled upwards into shadows, and the floor beneath her feet was covered in a thick layer of dust. For a moment, she stood there, trying to decide what drew her inside. Was it curiosity? Or was it something more, something that called her here, as though she had been summoned? She moved deeper into the hall, drawn to a room at the far end. It was smaller than the others, tucked away in a corner like a forgotten relic. She pushed the door open cautiously, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped inside. The room was strangely preserved, unlike the rest of the house. It seemed almost alive. A fire had once burned in the hearth, and the remains of a few burnt logs still smoldered faintly in the grate. The room was dominated by a large, ornate mirror. It stood on the far wall, its frame intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed almost too perfect. The glass was cloudy, and yet Anna felt drawn to it, as though something within it beckoned her closer. As she approached the mirror, her reflection appeared in the fogged glass. But it was not her reflection that held her gaze. It was what stood behind her. A figure, faint and shadowy, seemed to be trapped within the glass, moving just out of reach. It was not quite human, but its shape was unmistakable, tall, with dark eyes that gleamed from beneath a mass of dark hair. Her heart skipped a beat, and she spun around. The room was empty. She turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone, leaving only her own reflection staring back at her. Was it her imagination? Or was something in this house, something ancient, beginning to wake? A sudden chill ran down Anna's spine as she stared at the mirror, her pulse quickening. She felt as though she were being pulled toward it, her feet moving of their own accord. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the glass. The moment her skin touched the mirror, she felt a sharp, electric jolt run through her. as if the glass were alive. For a brief instant, she saw something shift within it, a dark blur, a shadow reaching out toward her. But then it was gone, leaving her staring at her own reflection once more. Her breath came in short gasps as she pulled her hand away, her mind racing. What had just happened? Was she losing her grip on reality, or was there something in this place that she couldn't understand? As she backed away from the mirror, the door behind her slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the air in the room grew colder still. Anna turned toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She was not alone. Something was in this house with her, something that had been waiting. And it was watching her. The reflection in the mirror was only the beginning. Chapter 2: The Mirror's Whisper. The night descended quickly over Emberwick Hall, its black cloak swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The village, already cloaked in mist, now appeared as little more than a smudge in the distance. Anna stood by the closed door, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breath. The sudden chill in the air had tightened around her chest, and the house seemed to pulse with an eerie life, like the deep, slow rhythm of a heart forgotten by time. The mirror, she could still feel it, like a weight in her chest. Her fingers had barely grazed the surface, and yet the sensation lingered, an unrelenting presence she couldn't shake. The moment she had touched the glass, everything had seemed to shift, like a thread pulling at the very fabric of her being. She turned away from the door, but the mirror called to her. Its frame, dark and ornate, seemed to stretch toward her, pulling her back into its depths. She couldn't explain it, but the urge to return to the mirror was overwhelming. It had been still when she entered, its surface dull and lifeless, but now it seemed different, more aware. Her feet moved of their own accord, almost as though the house itself were guiding her back to the mirror. The air grew heavier with each step, and the faint smell of dampness and decay seemed to thicken. When she reached the mirror again, she hesitated before raising her hand to touch it. The feeling from earlier, the electric shock, the sudden, inexplicable rush of cold, still lingered in her fingertips. But curiosity, stronger than any fear, drew her in. As her fingers made contact with the glass once more, a chill crept through her skin, crawling into her bones. But this time something was different. The mirror, once cloudy and indistinct, began to shimmer, as though it were alive. The fog that had clouded the surface dissipated, and Anna's reflection grew sharper, clearer. But then she saw it again. The figure, a silhouette barely more than a shadow, was there. This time it was closer, closer than it had been before. Its outline was now sharper, its presence undeniable. Tall, with wild dark hair, the figure stared at her with eyes that gleamed from within the murky depths of the glass. The eyes were impossibly dark, as though they absorbed all light, leaving only the faintest glimmer of something unsettling behind. Anna's breath hitched. She knew she should pull away, leave this place, and never return. Yet she couldn't move. The figure, though silent, seemed to beckon to her, drawing her in with an unspoken promise. And then it spoke. It was not a voice she could hear with her ears. It was a whisper, low and insistent, inside her mind. Help me. The words sent a shiver down her spine, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was an odd, overpowering sense of responsibility, as though this voice, this presence, was a part of her own soul, trapped and begging for release. Who? Who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling. For a long moment there was no answer. The figure remained still, its form hazy but somehow familiar. Then, slowly, it moved. Its eyes never left hers as its lips parted, but the words were nothing like the ones she had expected. You must remember, it whispered, the voice echoing inside her mind. You must remember what you've forgotten. Anna took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The room felt colder now, the shadows pressing in around her like a living thing. She could feel the weight of the mirror's gaze on her, as though it were reaching out to claim her. "Remember what?" she whispered aloud, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the figure or to herself. Her mind was reeling, her thoughts tangled in the web of this strange encounter. There was no answer, just the slow creak of the old house settling around her. But then something else, something far more unsettling, happened. The reflection in the mirror began to shift, the shadowy figure warping, blurring, and out of focus. It twisted as though caught in some unseen current, and the shape that had once been clear now seemed to melt and stretch, its features becoming distorted, impossible. The eyes remained, those dark, all-consuming eyes, but the rest of the figure seemed to dissolve into the air, like mist caught in the wind. Anna's breath caught in her throat. The figure was trying to reach through, trying to break free from the mirror. The glass began to ripple, the surface warping as though it were no longer solid. She could feel a pull, a strange magnetic force tugging at her. She raised her hand instinctively to her chest, as though trying to protect herself from something far worse than mere glass. The whispers returned, louder now, more frantic. "Help me, please. You know me. You must remember. It's the only way." Anna staggered backward, her heart racing. Her mind screamed at her to run, to leave this place and never look back. But the pull, the force of whatever had taken hold of the mirror was too strong. It was as if the mirror were not just a reflection, but a doorway, one that led somewhere far darker. And she was standing at its threshold. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and the whispers grew louder, as though 1,000 voices were speaking at once, all pleading for release. Then, with one final, sharp crack, the glass of the mirror shattered, splintering into 1,000 tiny shards that glittered like ice in the dim light of the room. But Anna didn't move. The silence that followed was deafening. The mirror was gone, shattered into nothingness, but she could still hear the whispers. They echoed in her mind, curling around her like cold fingers. "It's too late now. You've opened it. You've seen." And for the first time since stepping into Emberwick Hall, Anna realized the truth. She wasn't just a visitor here. She was part of something much darker, something much older, and there would be no leaving until she uncovered the truth of what had been trapped in the mirror. And what wanted out? Chapter 3, The Echo of the Past. The night passed in a haze for Anna. The shattered pieces of the mirror lay scattered across the floor like forgotten relics of a world she no longer understood. Her mind, still reeling from the encounter, could not quiet the voices that had filled her thoughts since she left the room. They murmured incessantly, a constant, almost imperceptible hum in the back of her mind. She had tried to sleep, to find solace in the small cottage she had rented near the village square, but the oppressive weight of what had happened in Emberwick Hall followed her. The whispers, the shadow in the mirror, the chilling presence that seemed to pulse from the house, they all clung to her like a shroud. Her thoughts drifted back to that room, to the shattered glass and the haunting voice that had called out to her. "You must remember." It had said it so simply, as though she already knew the answer. But she didn't. She didn't know what it wanted, or who it was. The daybreak brought no relief. The pale light filtered through the small window of her cottage, casting long shadows across the room. She stood before the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, staring blankly at the crackling flames. A feeling of dread had settled in her chest, something heavy that seemed to grow with each passing hour. She had tried to tell herself that it was simply the shock, the result of walking through a decaying, abandoned house in the dark. That she had imagined the figure, the words, the pull of the mirror. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. There was something real, something ancient, and far too powerful, waiting for her to remember. The question was why? And why her? She had come to Emberwick for peace, for silence. She had wanted to escape her past, to leave behind the lingering grief that followed her like a shadow. But Emberwick, with its fog-laced streets and eerie manor, was not offering solace. It was demanding something, something from her, something hidden in the very walls of the hall, in the depths of the village's history. As the morning hours wore on, Anna found herself drawn back to Emberwick Hall. She could feel it calling to her again, like a pull she could not resist. She had to know more. She had to understand what had happened, what she had unleashed when she touched that mirror. There was no avoiding it. The only way forward was to face it. With a resigned sigh, she bundled herself in a thick coat against the morning chill and made her way out of the cottage. The village was quiet, save for the occasional echo of a rooster crowing or the distant chatter of a few early risers. The fog still hung heavy over the land, muffling the sounds of the town as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The path to the manor felt longer today, as if the air itself had thickened, making every step feel like a labor. Each step seemed to resonate, amplifying the silence around her. The towering gates of Emberwick Hall loomed ahead, like the entrance to another world. Anna hesitated at the gates, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could turn back. She could leave this place behind and return to a life of quiet normalcy. But deep inside, she knew that whatever she had uncovered in that house would never let her go. Not until she understood. She pushed open the rusted gate, its squeal breaking the stillness of the morning, and made her way toward the grand, decaying entrance of Emberwick Hall. The doors, once towering and proud, now seemed fragile. They were swollen with age and neglect, but they opened with a hesitant push, the hinges groaning as though they hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of age. The house felt as though it had been waiting, watching her approach. The shadows, long and thin, stretched across the walls as if reaching for her, and the silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Anna's footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as she made her way back down the hall toward the room where she had first encountered the mirror. The further she walked, the more oppressive the air seemed, as if the house itself were a living thing, observing her every movement. She reached the door and hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The room was just as it had been the night before. The shattered remains of the mirror lay scattered on the floor, their jagged edges catching the light like shards of ice. But there was something else now, something different. The air was thick with a strange energy, crackling like static. And in the center of the room, where the mirror had once stood, there was something new. A shadow. It was faint at first, just a darkened shape in the corner of her vision. But as Anna stepped further into the room, the shadow began to take form. It was no longer simply a shape. It was a figure, a tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by the same darkness that had filled the mirror. Its eyes, though, were unmistakable. Dark and empty, they gleamed like two hollow pools of night. Anna stopped in her tracks, her heart hammering in her chest. The figure did not move, did not speak, but its presence filled the room, suffocating her. She could feel the air around her growing colder, the weight of something ancient pressing down on her. The whispers returned, a low murmur she could barely understand. They were there, just beneath the surface, as though trying to reach her. Remember, the words slipped through her mind again, and she shuddered. The figure in front of her seemed to waver, as if it was not quite solid, not quite real. And yet, there was something in its presence, something familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Anna's breath came in shallow gasps as she took a step forward, then another. The figure remained motionless, but its presence grew stronger, more intense, as if it were drawing her in. Remember. You must remember. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and the air grew colder still. The moment her fingertips brushed against the shadow, a rush of images exploded in her mind. Fragments of memories she had long forgotten, images of a time and place she could not recognize. Faces, some familiar, others strange, flashed before her eyes, their features twisted in pain or sorrow. And then at the center of it all, the mirror. The memory shattered as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Anna gasping for air, her head spinning. She stepped back, disoriented, her mind reeling from the sudden rush of forgotten images. The shadow in the corner of the room had disappeared, but she knew it was not gone. It was still here, somewhere, waiting. Waiting for her to remember. Chapter 4. The Memory Beneath the Surface. The silence of Emberwick Hall seemed to grow even deeper as Anna stood frozen in the room, her heart racing in the aftermath of the shadow's brief but powerful presence. The air still felt charged with a strange, oppressive energy, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Her mind swirled with images that didn't make sense, pieces of a puzzle that were slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. But one thing was certain, she couldn't ignore this any longer. Whatever was happening here, whatever had been unleashed, was real. She could no longer pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen, or felt what she'd felt. The shadow, the whispering memories, the mirror that seemed to reflect something far darker than her own reality, they were all part of something ancient. Something hidden in the very walls of this house. She had to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying or painful it might be. Anna turned her gaze back to the shattered mirror on the floor, the jagged edges glinting in the pale light that filtered in through the grimy windows. It looked like nothing more than a broken piece of glass now, but she knew it was far more than that. The mirror had been the conduit, the gateway, and it wasn't finished with her yet. Her steps were slow as she approached the fragments. She crouched down, running her fingers lightly over the sharp edges of the glass, tracing the pattern of cracks that spread outward like the veins of some ancient living thing. There was no way she could fix it, not physically, but something deep inside told her the mirror still had a role to play. It had shown her something last night, something she couldn't remember in its entirety. Perhaps if she could look again, there would be another glimpse, another piece of the puzzle. But as she reached for the largest shard, a voice broke the silence. "You're still here." The words were soft, but thick with the weight of old grief. Anna jerked back, her hand instinctively pulling away from the glass as if it had burned her. She spun around to face the voice, her pulse pounding in her ears. Standing in the doorway was a woman, older, with sharp features that spoke of both beauty and bitterness, her eyes dark with secrets. Anna's breath caught. The woman looked like she belonged to the house, like one of its long-forgotten inhabitants. But how could that be? The village had said the house had been abandoned for years. "I thought I heard something," the woman said, her voice steady and composed. Her gaze flickered briefly to the broken mirror before locking eyes with Anna. "But I see it's just you." Anna took an instinctual step back. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice tight with unease. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face whatever this woman might reveal, but she had no choice. The pieces were slipping into place, and she could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, ready to break free. The woman smiled, a sad, almost knowing smile. "I am Eleanor Blackwood," she said softly, as though the name carried a heavy burden. "And this house, this mirror, they are mine." Anna's mind reeled. The Blackwood family had been a part of Emberwick's history for centuries, their name woven into the town's very foundation. But what could this woman have to do with the house now, after so many years of abandonment? Eleanor stepped fully into the room, her presence almost ethereal, like a memory walking through the door. "I should have known you'd come," she murmured, her voice distant. "After all these years, I thought the curse had been forgotten. But some things can never be erased." Anna's confusion deepened. "What curse? What are you talking about?" she demanded. She was tired of the cryptic words, the veiled hints. She needed answers. Eleanor's eyes flickered toward the mirror again, and this time Anna felt a strange tremor in the air. This mirror was never meant to be touched by anyone outside the family, Eleanor said, her voice tightening with an emotion Anna couldn't quite place. "It was a window into another world, one we thought we had sealed away. But the truth is, that world has always been part of us. It's what we've run from for so long." Anna frowned, unable to understand. Another world? What does that mean? She stepped closer, trying to piece together the cryptic words. "And how do you know so much about it?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "Because I was the one who bound it," she said quietly. "I was the one who sealed it away. But something always lingers, doesn't it? Shadows that never truly leave. The mirror." She broke off, her gaze distant again, as though the past had come crashing back. The mirror was meant to keep him inside, to keep the thing that haunts this house from breaking free. But it's never been fully contained. Not for long. It feeds on our memories, our regrets, our guilt. And every time someone new comes here, it finds a way to reach out, to pull them in. Anna's heart skipped a beat. "You mean it's alive? The mirror? It's something more than glass?" Eleanor's face grew somber. "Yes, it's more than just a mirror. It's a prison, a door, and now it has found you." The words sank deep into Anna's chest, the weight of them suffocating. The mirror, the shadow, the whispers, all of it had been drawing her here for a reason. She was meant to play a part in something far greater than she could have imagined. She had come to Emberwick for peace, for escape, but now she realized with a shiver there would be no escape. "How do I stop it?" Anna asked, her voice hoarse. She had no idea what she was asking, but something inside her was pushing her to find the answer. She had to stop it. She had to stop it. She had to stop whatever was coming. Eleanor's eyes flickered to the shattered pieces of the mirror, and a shadow of regret passed over her face. "The only way to stop it," she whispered, "is to remember. To remember what's been lost. To face what has been hidden for so long." Anna's head throbbed, the weight of the words pressing down on her, and she could feel it again, the pull of the mirror, as though it were calling her name. The truth was in there, buried deep beneath the surface of the glass, waiting to be unearthed. But was she ready to face it? Chapter 5: The Forgotten Door. The air in Emberwick Hall was thick with the kind of silence that felt suffocating, like a blanket pulled too tightly over the room. Anna stood in the wake of Eleanor Blackwood's words, the weight of her promise to remember, whatever that meant, settling heavily in her chest. The mirror, though shattered, seemed to hum with an unseen energy, its dark fragments gleaming like scattered stars, each one holding a secret, a fragment of truth. But Eleanor had disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving Anna alone with her thoughts. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of questions spinning faster than she could grasp. What was Eleanor's connection to the mirror? What had she meant by remembering? And most chilling of all, what had Eleanor meant when she said the mirror was alive? As Anna stared at the shards of glass scattered across the floor, something within her whispered that the answers were within her reach. But how? How could she remember what had been hidden from her? The house, it seemed, was alive in its own way, reacting to her presence as if it had been waiting, too. The walls creaked in subtle protest, the floorboards groaning with every step she took. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, deeper, as if the very fabric of the place were pulling her further into its grasp. In the corner of the room, where the pale light from the window barely touched, stood an ancient door she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away in the darkest part of the room, half hidden by an old armoire that had been left ajar. Its wood was darkened with age, the grain twisting and curling as though it had been carved by hands that had long since been forgotten. But what caught Anna's attention most was the faint, almost imperceptible glow that emanated from the crack beneath the door. It was not a light she could see directly, but something she could feel, something that beckoned her. She approached it cautiously, her pulse quickening with every step. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a small latch that seemed out of place on a door so old. Yet, despite its age and lack of discernible opening, it seemed to be waiting for her, calling her to open it. Anna's fingers brushed against the latch, and as she did, the air in the room shifted, growing heavier. The faint glow beneath the door grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. For a moment, she hesitated, fear clawing at the edges of her mind. Was this the path to the answer she was seeking, or was it another trap, another way for the house to claim her? Her breath caught in her throat, but she pushed the fear aside. Eleanor had spoken of remembering, of facing the past. Perhaps whatever lay behind this door was the key to unlocking the truth. She couldn't back away now. With a trembling hand, Anna slid the latch open. The door groaned in protest as it slowly creaked forward, revealing a narrow, winding staircase that descended into complete darkness. The air from beyond the door was thick with a damp, earthy scent, carrying with it a faint taste of iron. The hairs on Anna's neck stood on end as she peered into the void below. There was no light, no indication of what lay beyond the reach of her vision. But the pull, the same pull that had led her to the mirror, was stronger now, urging her forward. Without thinking, she stepped into the darkness, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the steps. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling downward in a twisting, claustrophobic path. As she descended, the temperature dropped sharply, the chill sinking into her bones. It felt as though she were moving deeper into the heart of the house, into the very soul of Emberwick Hall. The further she went, the more oppressive the silence became. It was not the usual kind of quiet. It was a silence that weighed heavily on her chest, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. Finally, the staircase opened up into a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, cobwebs hanging in the corners like forgotten memories. In the center of the room was a small wooden table, its surface worn and scarred by time. Upon it lay a single object, a weathered book, its cover faded and frayed from years of neglect. Anna's gaze immediately locked onto the book. The air around it seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though it had been waiting for her to arrive. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out and gently opened it. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As she flipped through the pages, her heart began to race. The book was a journal, a record of the Blackwood family's history. But it was not a history of their wealth or their prestige. It was something darker, a record of their dealings with the supernatural. Each page was filled with strange symbols, cryptic phrases, and drawings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Some of the sketches were of the mirror, others of strange rituals and forgotten rites. There were references to an ancient entity, something that had been bound by the Blackwoods long ago. A force that existed in the space between worlds, feeding on their memories, their fears, their guilt. As Anna's eyes skimmed over the pages, one name stood out, scrawled in frantic handwriting at the back of the journal. The one in the glass. Her breath caught in her throat as the words seemed to jump off the page. She had seen it. Him. And the mirror, the shadow that had crossed the glass, the one that had whispered to her. The door to the room slammed shut behind her, plunging her into darkness once more. The journal fell from her hands, its pages fluttering as though caught in a gust of wind, but there was no wind, only silence. The shadows in the room shifted, twisting in unnatural shapes as a low, guttural voice echoed from the darkness. "You cannot run from me, Anna." Her heart froze as the voice seemed to come from all around her, vibrating in her very bones. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay still, to focus. The truth was here. He was here, the one in the glass, and she had no choice but to face him. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick, suffocating darkness. The shadows seemed to draw closer, coiling around her like a living thing. "I am everything you fear, Anna," the voice murmured. "I'm the past, the memory you have forgotten, the one who has been waiting for you all this time." Anna's mind reeled. The mirror, the house, Eleanor's warnings. It was all connected, but the connection was slipping away, just beyond her grasp. With trembling hands, she reached out for the journal, determined to find the final clue. But as her fingers touched the pages once more, they seemed to dissolve into the air, vanishing like smoke. The book was gone. And then, in the silence, there was only the voice. "You are mine." The room began to spin, the walls closing in. Anna felt her body growing heavier, her limbs unresponsive as the darkness overwhelmed her. It was no longer a room she was standing in. It was a space between worlds, a place where reality and illusion collided, and she was trapped at the center of it. Somewhere, far away, a whisper reached her ears, faint but clear. "Remember. You must remember." But the darkness was too strong, the pull was too great, and Anna couldn't escape. Not yet. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Glass. When Anna awoke, it was as though she had been pulled from the depths of a dream, one she couldn't remember, yet knew she had been drowning in. She was no longer standing in the shadowed room beneath Emberwick Hall. She wasn't even sure where she was, only that the oppressive weight of the house had lifted, replaced by a cold, unnerving stillness. Her eyes fluttered open, her body heavy, as though waking from a long sleep, yet she felt as though only moments had passed. Her breath was shallow, her hands trembling. The air around her was strangely still, yet suffused with an eerie, unnatural calm. The first thing she noticed was the mirror. It was no longer broken, no longer shattered. It stood before her, whole, its surface smooth and unmarred. The reflection, however, was wrong. It was not her own face staring back at her. A young woman, her features soft and pale, stood in the glass. Her hair was dark, falling in loose waves around her face, and her eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to stare not at Anna, but through her, as if seeing something far beyond the present. She wore a gown, an old, antiquated dress, the fabric dark and heavy, the cut unfamiliar and out of place. Anna recoiled, heart hammering in her chest. This woman in the glass was not her. She had no memory of seeing her before, but something deep within her, something primal, felt an odd, jarring recognition. The woman in the mirror opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her lips moved again, more urgently this time, though the silence in the room remained deafening. Anna leaned forward, drawn inexplicably toward the glass. She reached out a hand, her breath quickening. As her fingers brushed against the surface of the mirror, something strange happened. The reflection shifted. The woman's features blurred, melting away like smoke, replaced by flashes of images, quick, disjointed fragments that danced across the surface like half-remembered dreams. A hallway, a darkened door, the scent of something sweet and decaying, a shadow moving in the corner of her vision. They all faded, only to be replaced by another image, more vivid, more haunting. Anna felt herself falling into it, falling deeper, pulled toward the mirror like a magnet. Her body trembled, her mind reeling with the flood of images, each more surreal than the last. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as the mirror seemed to warp around her, the glass growing softer, more liquid, as though it were no longer a barrier between worlds, but a gateway. Remember, came the voice again, soft, insistent, familiar. The images blurred into one final scene, a dark figure standing in the center of a room, watching her. The man, or whatever it was tall, cloaked in shadow, his features hidden, save for his eyes. They glowed with an unnatural light, piercing through the darkness like twin stars. The reflection of the man seemed to reach toward her, his hand extended, as though beckoning her to cross the threshold. "Who are you?" she whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she even realized she had spoken. The figure in the mirror did not respond, but his eyes, those glowing eyes, filled with something beyond malice, something ancient, seemed to hold her captive. The darkness around him deepened, consuming everything in its path, until there was nothing but the figure and Anna standing on the precipice. And then the voice spoke again, its tone now colder, sharper. "I am the one you have forgotten, Anna. You cannot escape me. Not now. Not ever." The words sliced through her like a blade, a cold chill running down her spine. She felt the air shift again, thickening with an unnatural weight, as if the room itself were collapsing, folding in on itself. The surface of the mirror rippled, the glass warping around her fingers like liquid mercury. The man in the reflection, the one with the glowing eyes, seemed to extend his hand farther, closer. His fingers brushed against hers, and as they did, a violent shock of cold electricity surged through her body. Anna stumbled back, gasping, her mind spinning as the world around her fragmented. The reflection disappeared. The mirror, once again, was just a mirror. But the cold, the chill that had seeped into her very bones, remained. Panting, Anna's hand flew to her chest, her heart racing as she tried to regain control of her breath. The room was silent again, but the silence was deafening. She was alone. Or at least, she thought she was. The glow beneath the door she had descended earlier was gone, and in its place was a heavy, unyielding darkness. The house seemed to be waiting, holding its breath for her next move. Anna's mind raced with the pieces of what she had just seen. The woman in the mirror, the man with the glowing eyes, the strange, haunting images that had filled her vision. It was all connected to something that she couldn't fully comprehend, but knew in her soul she was meant to understand. Her fingers, still trembling, brushed the surface of the mirror one more time. The glass was cold, smooth, unyielding, silent once again. The woman was gone. The man was gone. The door behind her, however, remained. And yet, for all the mystery swirling around her, one thing was certain. The mirror had shown her something, someone, that she was meant to remember. But who was she, and why had she forgotten? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, echoing noise that cut through the silence. The sound of something moving, something heavy, dragging itself along the floor. Her pulse quickened as she turned toward the source of the sound. The door. It was moving, slowly, creaking on ancient hinges as if someone, on the other side was pushing it open. Fear clawed at her chest, but she steeled herself. She had no choice but to face what lay beyond that door. What waited for her, what had been waiting for years, would be revealed. With one last glance at the mirror, Anna turned toward the door. The darkness behind it seemed to swallow the very light from the room. She hesitated, but only for a moment. She had come this far. She had no intention of turning back now. Then with that resolve, she stepped forward, her hand closing around the cold brass knob, and opened the door. Beyond it lay something darker than anything she could have imagined. Chapter 7. Through the Hollow Veil. The door creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan, as if protesting its own awakening from an endless slumber. As it swung wide, the room beyond was swallowed by an unnatural darkness, its edges curling inward like a living thing. Anna's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she hesitated at the threshold. There was something unsettling about this place, something that made her feel as though the very air around her had thickened into a stifling fog. She took a careful step inside, her eyes struggling to adjust to the oppressive blackness. The floor beneath her feet was cold and uneven, the faint scrape of her shoes echoing off the walls as she moved forward. The smell in the air was musty, like old wood and forgotten memories, as though this room had been sealed off from the world for centuries. The door behind her slammed shut, its heavy weight cutting off any escape. The sound echoed, reverberating through the chamber with a finality that sent a cold shiver down her spine. A low, muffled sound drifted toward her from the farthest corner of the room. Anna's breath caught in her throat, her body stiffening with an instinctive fear. It was a soft scraping noise, like fingers dragging against stone, accompanied by the faintest whisper of movement. She held her breath, straining her ears to catch any hint of what was hiding in the dark. And then it came, a voice. Not the voice from the mirror, but something familiar. Anna. The name was spoken softly, as though carried on the wind, yet it seemed to come from all directions at once. The whisper slid into her bones, igniting a deep primordial recognition. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Her heart fluttered wildly, unsure whether it was fear or curiosity that urged her forward. Anna, it's time to come home. The words wrapped around her like a suffocating embrace, pulling her deeper into the heart of the room. Her legs moved on their own accord, as though the floor beneath her had become magnetic, drawing her closer to whatever waited in the suffocating dark. There, standing just beyond the reach of her fading vision, was a figure, a silhouette, shifting and restless like smoke caught in a breeze. The shadows flickered and danced around it, twisting and contorting with each movement. The figure was tall, hunched, as if it were burdened by a weight it could not shake. Its shape flickered in and out of focus, as though it were not entirely of this world, but something that bled between realities. Anna could barely make out the details. The faint, ethereal glow of pale skin, the long, dark hair that seemed to float just above its shoulders, and the gleam of eyes that shone like distant stars. Her throat went dry. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, its movements fluid and slow, like the ghost of something long forgotten. As it neared, Anna felt a coldness unlike any she had experienced before, a chill that seeped into her bones and wrapped around her heart. "I am the keeper," the figure said, its voice now resonating through her very soul. "The keeper of lost things, lost souls, lost memories." Anna's mind raced. "Lost things?" she echoed. "What are you talking about?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it extended one long, slender hand toward her. The fingers were pale, impossibly thin, and as they reached out, Anna felt an overwhelming urge to take the figure's hand as though some invisible force was guiding her toward it. Her instinct screamed at her to retreat, to run, but her body betrayed her. She stepped forward, her hand moving toward the outstretched one. She wasn't sure why she did it, Perhaps it was the same strange pull she had felt toward the mirror, or perhaps it was the voice that had followed her, urging her to come closer. Just as her fingertips brushed the figure's skin, the world around her shifted. The room seemed to blur and twist, the shadows deepening, pulling her into a vortex of swirling darkness. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of forgotten things, and the figure before her was no longer just a silhouette. It was becoming something more. A vision unfolded before her eyes, distorted, feverish, like a nightmare unfolding in the deepest recesses of her mind. She saw herself, not as she was now, but as she had been before. She saw a younger version of herself, standing in front of Emberwick Hall, bathed in moonlight. She saw the reflection of a woman she did not recognize, a woman who looked like her, yet entirely foreign. "You've always known," the voice whispered, its tone both familiar and alien, ringing in her ears. "You've always known, Anna. The mirror, this place, is part of you. You're part of it." The vision flickered. She was no longer outside Emberwick Hall. Instead, she was in a room, standing before a mirror. The same mirror. The glass was dark, clouded, and within it she saw herself, only this time it was not her reflection. It was the woman from the mirror. The woman who had spoken to her, who had beckoned to her from the depths of the glass. "Why are you showing me this?" Anna cried out, her voice thick with panic. "What does it mean?" But the figure said nothing. Its hand slowly lowered, as though dismissing her question. The vision shattered, dissolving into fragmented pieces like broken glass falling from the sky. The room around her began to shift again, the shadows stretching long and dark, swallowing the space hole. The cold intensified, wrapping itself around her until she felt as though she were drowning in it. And yet, there was something oddly familiar about it all, something she had seen before, something she had known all along. "You must remember," the voice urged. "The past cannot be outrun. Not here. Not in this place. It is time to face what you have forgotten." With a sudden, sharp motion, the figure disappeared into the darkness, its presence fading like a dream that slips away upon waking. Anna stood alone, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her body frozen in place. The room around her was still, but the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as though something unseen was watching her, waiting for her to understand. And then, from somewhere deep within her, a memory surfaced. A memory of another time, another place, of a life long lost. The figure, the mirror, the voices, they were all part of something far greater than she had ever realized. She had been here before. She had always been here. With that realization, the air around her thickened once again, and the door she had entered through appeared before her. It beckoned her. But Anna knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning. The door swung open, revealing a long, dark corridor stretching into the unknown. As Anna stepped toward it, she knew that her journey had only just begun, and the answers she sought were still waiting for her. Chapter 8: The Depths of the Mirror. Anna's fingers trembled against the doorframe as she stepped into the cold, unyielding corridor. The shadows clung to her like a second skin, wrapping around her with a suffocating grip. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay, as if the walls themselves had absorbed centuries of secrets. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, echoing in the silence, a soft whisper lost in the vast emptiness. As she moved deeper into the hallway, the darkness seemed to close in tighter, each step more reluctant than the last. The flickering, dim light from the walls, the faintest remnants of a long-abandoned world, did little to push back the crushing void that surrounded her. The floor beneath her feet was uneven, the stones slick with the dampness that clung to the place. She almost felt as if she were walking through a tomb, a place forgotten by time itself. The voice, that same voice from the mirror, whispered in her mind again, like a soft thread connecting her to something ancient, something she could not yet comprehend. "You are not alone here, Anna," it breathed. "You never were." Her chest tightened, and she forced herself to take another step, though every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to escape the oppressive weight of the hall. But she could not. The pull of the mirror was too strong, the mirror that had been her reflection, her voice, her silent companion, the mirror that spoke in riddles, weaving threads between truth and illusion. Her fingers grazed the cool stone of the walls as she walked, her mind drifting between memories of things long buried. Faces flickered in her thoughts, people she had known, and yet not quite. Her own reflection had seemed different, distant in the mirror's depths, as though she were gazing at someone else, someone who had lived another life entirely, a life that no longer seemed so distant. And then, through the darkness ahead of her, a soft glow began to appear, a pale, shimmering light, like a star in the abyss, flickering just at the edge of her vision. It was faint, barely perceptible, yet it called to her. She quickened her pace, her footsteps growing more urgent, as though the very act of moving toward it might provide the answers she sought. The light grew stronger, more defined, until Anna found herself standing before a vast, open door. Unlike the other doors she had encountered, this one seemed to pulse with life, as though it were alive, waiting for her. The glow emanated from within, a soft, silvery hue that seemed to shimmer and dance like firelight. Taking a deep breath, Anna pushed the door open, the wood groaning in protest as it creaked wide. The room beyond was vast, far larger than any space she had encountered in Emberwick Hall. It was circular, its walls lined with shelves that reached up to the high ceiling, their surfaces heavy with dust and age. But it wasn't the shelves that drew her attention. It was the center of the room, where an enormous mirror stood tall, its frame gilded and intricate, its glass dark and reflective. For a long moment, Anna stood frozen in place, staring at the mirror. There was something wrong with it, something alive. The surface was not still. It rippled like water disturbed by a gentle breeze, but there was no breeze here. The glass shimmered, flickering in and out of focus, as though it were struggling to contain whatever lay within it. Her fingers grazed the cool stone of the walls as she walked, her mind drifting between memories of things long buried. Faces flickered in her thoughts, people she had known, and yet not quite. Her own reflection had seemed different, distant in the mirror's depths, as though she were gazing at someone else, someone who had lived another life entirely, a life that no longer seemed so distant. And then, through the darkness ahead of her, a soft glow began to appear, a pale, shimmering light, like a star in the abyss, flickering just at the edge of her vision. It was faint, barely perceptible, yet it called to her. She quickened her pace, her footsteps growing more urgent, as though the very act of moving toward it might provide the answers she sought. The light grew stronger, more defined, until Anna found herself standing before a vast, open door. Unlike the other doors she had encountered, this one seemed to pulse with life, as though it were alive, waiting for her. The glow emanated from within, a soft, silvery hue that seemed to shimmer and dance like firelight. Taking a deep breath, Anna pushed the door open, the wood groaning in protest as it creaked wide. The room beyond was vast, far larger than any space she had encountered in Emberwick Hall. It was circular, its walls lined with shelves that reached up to the high ceiling, their surfaces heavy with dust and age. But it wasn't the shelves that drew her attention. It was the center of the room, where an enormous mirror stood tall, its frame gilded and intricate, its glass dark and reflective. For a long moment, Anna stood frozen in place, staring at the mirror. There was something wrong with it, something alive. The surface was not still. It rippled like water disturbed by a gentle breeze, but there was no breeze here. The glass shimmered, flickering in and out of focus, as though it were struggling to contain whatever lay within it. You don't belong here anymore, the reflection said, her voice growing louder, more insistent. You've lived your life, but it's mine now. It always has been. Anna's heart thundered in her chest as she turned to flee, but the door had vanished. The space was now an endless cavern, the walls stretching far beyond what should have been possible. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a window, a portal to a world that bled into hers, distorting reality in ways she couldn't comprehend. Her mind screamed for escape, but she couldn't move. The mirror had her now, and it wasn't going to let go. It's time, Anna, the reflection cooed, her voice wrapping around Anna like a sinister lullaby. Time to come home. The last thing Anna saw before the darkness claimed her was her own face, alive, staring back at her from within the mirror. And in that moment, she understood. The mirror hadn't been a reflection at all. It was a prison, and she had been its captive for far longer than she realized. The cold fingers of the past reached out to pull her in, and Anna knew there would be no escape. Chapter 9. The Shattered Reflection. The air was suffocating in the void between worlds. Anna's eyes fluttered open, but the world around her was no longer familiar. The dark, oppressive corridors of Emberwick Hall were gone, replaced by an endless stretch of cold, gray mist that seemed to swirl and churn like a living thing. Her body felt weightless, her feet unable to find solid ground. The oppressive silence pressed in on her from all sides. The world muted, as if her senses were being dulled by some unseen force. She tried to move, to speak, but her limbs were sluggish, unwilling to obey her commands. Panic clawed at her chest as she fought against the sensation of being trapped, but no matter how hard she tried, the feeling of weightlessness only deepened. It was as though she were suspended in a dream, disconnected from time, from space, from the very reality she had once known. In the distance, a shadow moved, barely perceptible against the swirling mist. It flickered like a mirage, dissolving and reforming with each passing moment, as if it existed both here and not here at all. Anna's heart thudded in her chest, the only sound in the vast emptiness. She strained to focus on the shadow, her mind struggling to latch onto something, anything, that could explain what was happening to her. The mist around her seemed to shift, and slowly, like the first stirrings of an ancient storm, the fog began to clear. A familiar shape emerged from the haze, one that she recognized all too well. It was the mirror. The same ornate frame, the same dark glass, but this time it was enormous, stretching as far as she could see, a towering, unyielding presence in the distance. She could feel the pull of it, as though it were calling her, drawing her closer with every passing second. Without thinking, Anna's feet began to move, her body responding to some invisible command. She walked toward the mirror, her steps slow and deliberate, the mists parting before her like a curtain drawn by an unseen hand. The reflection in the glass, however, was not hers. Instead, it was the other Anna, the one she had seen within the mirror's depths, the one whose life had never been lived. This time, she wasn't just a figure trapped in the glass. The reflection was solid, real, a perfect doppelganger, standing tall and proud with a faint, knowing smile on her lips. Her eyes, however, were empty, hollow, as if they were staring at something beyond the surface of the world itself. As Anna approached, her reflection's smile grew, and for the first time she heard the voice clearly, not in her mind, but as if it were coming from the reflection itself. "You've come to join me at last," it whispered, its voice rich with cold satisfaction. "I've waited for so long. I knew you would come." Anna's pulse raced, a chill creeping up her spine. She didn't know how, but she could feel the sinister presence of the reflection, the darkness that was clinging to it, wrapping itself around the woman who stood before her. The mirror was no longer just a window. It was a trap, a prison, and Anna was caught within its snare. "Don't you see, Anna?" The reflection continued, her voice laced with a cruel delight. "We were never meant to be separate. I am you, and you are me. We were always meant to be one." Anna's breath caught in her throat as the reflection's lips curled into a cruel grin. It was no longer a simple doppelganger. It was something more, something darker. The reflection reached out with an outstretched hand, and Anna instinctively recoiled, her heart hammering in her chest. "Come, Anna," the reflection coaxed, its voice both gentle and mocking, a strange mix of familiarity and menace. "It's time to stop running. You belong here, in the mirror, with me." The words reverberated in Anna's mind, seeping into her thoughts, twisting her sense of self. She wanted to scream, to fight against the pull, but her body felt paralyzed, trapped within the grasp of the reflection's gaze. It was as if the mirror was reaching inside her, unraveling the threads of her identity, replacing her very essence with the shadow of the woman who stood before her. Suddenly, the mirror began to shimmer, the surface rippling like water. Anna's reflection wavered, distorting and warping as if it were struggling to break free from its own confines. The image flickered, then cracked, a sharp, violent fracture running down the center of the glass. It split in two, the pieces hanging suspended in midair, suspended by an unseen force. For a moment, there was only silence, an oppressive, unbearable silence that stretched out into eternity. And then the voice came again, but this time it was not the reflections. "Anna." The voice was different, softer, more desperate. It echoed through the mist, reverberating in the cold emptiness of the space. Anna spun around, her eyes scanning the shifting mists, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Anna, you must wake up." It was familiar, this voice. She had heard it before, but it was distant now, like a memory barely clinging to the edges of her consciousness. The mist swirled, and through the fog, a shape began to form, a figure stepping out of the darkness, its outline vague and distinct. But as it grew clearer, Anna's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was someone she thought she had lost forever, someone she had not seen in what felt like a lifetime. It was her mother. "Mom?" Anna's voice broke, fragile and trembling. "Is it really you?" Her mother smiled, though it was a sad smile, one that carried with it a weight of grief and regret. "I never wanted this for you, Anna," she said, her voice low and sorrowful. "The mirror, it's not what it seems. It can never be." Anna's heart thundered in her chest as she reached out, her hand trembling as she sought to touch her mother, to grasp the reality of her presence. But before she could reach her, the figure began to dissolve, fading away like a dream slipping through her fingers. "You must stop it, Anna," her mother's voice echoed, fading into the distance. "Before it's too late." And then she was gone. Anna stood alone, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the mirror. The reflection was gone now, lost to the cracks that had splintered the glass. The room felt colder than ever, the oppressive weight of the mist pressing down on her, heavier than before. But there was no time to grieve, no time to process what had just happened. The mirror was still alive, still hungry, and it was calling to her once more. Anna took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She didn't know what the mirror wanted from her, what price it would demand. But she knew one thing with certainty. She could not, she would not let it claim her. Not now. Not ever. With renewed determination, Anna turned away from the ruins of the mirror, her footsteps echoing in the stillness as she set out to find the only thing that could free her, the truth. Chapter 10. The Final Reflection. The mist had thickened, swirling around Anna like an endless sea, pulling her deeper into its folds. The world felt disjointed, fractured, like she was caught between the living and the dead. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, a rapid thrum that seemed to echo through the silence of the fog. There was no sign of the mirror now, no reflection taunting her, no shadow of the other Anna waiting to drag her into its darkness. Yet she knew with a certainty that cut through her fear that she hadn't escaped it. The mirror wasn't something you could simply outrun. It wasn't an object, but a presence, an idea that seeped into the very fabric of your being. It lived inside you, just as it had lived inside Emberwick Hall, just as it had lived inside her mother. And now, as Anna ventured deeper into the mist, the weight of the truth began to settle on her shoulders. The mirror wasn't just a cursed object. It was a doorway, one that led not to another world, but to the darkest corners of the human soul. It reflected not only who you were, but who you could never be. Who you might have been if the world had been different, if time had flowed in another direction. It offered not salvation, but a never-ending cycle of longing and regret, an eternal struggle between who you were and who you wanted to be. The path before her was shrouded in a shadow darker than the mist itself, and with every step she took, the air seemed to thicken. Her lungs ached, and the weight of the fog pressed down on her, as though it were trying to suffocate her. She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, willing herself to stay calm, to think clearly. Then, as though summoned by her thoughts, the mirror appeared once again, a fractured, splintered version of itself, standing in the distance. The glass was jagged like the remnants of a shattered dream, and yet there it was, beckoning her forward with the same insistent pull it always had. But this time, Anna wasn't afraid. She had come to understand something in her journey, something vital. The mirror wasn't her enemy. It was a reflection of her, of all the broken pieces of herself she had tried to bury. The mirror could show her the past, the choices she had made, the regrets that had haunted her. But it didn't have the power to define her. Not anymore. With each step, she felt the power of her mother's voice, urging her on, guiding her through the fog. The truth, Anna. You must face it. As Anna approached the mirror, she could hear her own breath, steady now, the panic from earlier replaced by a quiet resolve. The mirror rippled, as if recognizing her presence, and the broken glass shimmered in the dim light, offering her one last glimpse of the reflection that had tormented her for so long. But this time, it wasn't the reflection of the woman who had haunted her dreams. This time, it was something else, something real. She saw herself standing before the mirror, but not the version of herself that had been trapped in its grasp. This Anna was free. This Anna had broken the chains that had held her, had defied the curse of the mirror, had chosen to walk away from the darkness that had consumed so many before her. And then the other Anna, the one who had never been looked at her, and for the first time there was no malice in her gaze, only a quiet, resigned understanding. The reflection seemed to soften, fading away as if accepting its fate. Anna reached out, her hand trembling slightly, but with the confidence that had eluded her for so long. She touched the glass, feeling its cold surface beneath her fingers. For a moment there was silence, an eternal pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then, without warning, the mirror shattered, the glass splintering into 1,000 tiny pieces, scattering into the fog like forgotten memories. The mist began to dissipate, the weight lifting from Anna's chest as the fog cleared around her. The world she had been trapped in, the one filled with shadows and ghosts, faded away, leaving her standing alone, bathed in the light of an uncertain dawn. The hall, too, had vanished. The walls of Emberwick, the dark corridors, the endless rooms filled with the weight of the past, all of it was gone. She stood now in a place that felt like neither here nor there, a place that was neither dream nor reality. Anna looked around, breathing in the cool, crisp air that now surrounded her. The silence was different, quiet, yes, but peaceful. It no longer felt like a suffocating void. The world, though still veiled in uncertainty, had opened up before her. She wasn't trapped anymore. It's over, she whispered to herself, her voice steady and calm. It's really over. For the first time in what felt like forever, Anna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She could move forward. She could step into whatever life awaited her, no longer burdened by the ghost of the past, no longer chained by the mirror's curse. She turned away from the broken pieces of the glass, the remnants of the reflection that had once consumed her. She wasn't the woman in the mirror anymore. She was herself, whole, free. As she walked away, the first rays of the morning sun began to filter through the mist, casting light upon the path ahead. Anna didn't know where that path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never be haunted by the mirror again. The past was gone, and the future was hers to claim. And somewhere in the distance, she could almost hear the faintest whisper of her mother's voice, a soft sigh carried on the wind. You're free now, Anna. The words were all she needed. She stepped forward into the unknown, her heart steady and unafraid as the mist cleared behind her. And for the first time, she truly believed she had left Emberwick Hall behind, forever.